deluge. And at a special session of the Assembly of the Gods, he made all of them, and especially Enki, swear to keep the secret. The last part of the Atrahasis text, a major part of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and other Mesopotamian texts describe at length the events that followed. How the catastrophe of the deluge was used by Enlil to achieve the annihilation of mankind, and how Enki, opposed to the decision which Enlil forced upon the Assembly of Gods, contrived to save his faithful follower Sesudra, also known as Noah, by designing for him a submersible vessel that could withstand the avalanche of water. So, as we can see, the story of the Great Flood in the Old Testament is closely associated with the first spaceport at Sippar. The Anunnaki retreated from the planet's surface in their shuttlecraft and achieved orbit as the onslaught of tidal waves swept across Mesopotamia. Before we move on to the next section, the archive wanted to make a note about landing places. Although Sitchin's research provides a very compelling explanation about the first Anunnaki spaceport in Sippar, very little detail is provided about other landing places in Mesopotamia. And, of course, a landing place is markedly different from a planetary spaceport used to send heavy cargo into orbit. A good comparison would be the differences between a rocket launch pad and a helicopter pad nowadays. But rest assured, there were landing places all over Mesopotamia and Egypt. And after the Great Flood, one of these landing places would become more important than even the original spaceport in Sippar. After the deluge had swept all over the face of the earth, the first problem facing the Anunnaki was where to get the seeds needed for renewed cultivation. Fortunately, specimens of the domesticated cereals had been sent to Nibiru. Enlil then looked for a safe place where the seeds could be sown to restart agriculture. The earth was still covered with water, and the only place that seemed suitable was the mountain of aromatic cedars. Sitchin posits that the selection of the Cedar Mountains by Enlil and its conversion into a restricted or holy place was most likely not accidental. Throughout the Near East, indeed worldwide, there is only one unique cedar mountain of universal fame, in Lebanon. It is the location, to this very day, at Baalbek in Lebanon, of a vast platform supported by colossal stone blocks that are still a marvel of technology. It was a landing place of the Anunnaki, a platform that persistent legends hold to have been built in pre-diluvial times, even as early as the days of Adam. It was the only place after the deluge immediately suitable for handling the shuttlecraft of the Anunnaki. The spaceport at Sippar was washed away and buried under layers of mud. Control of the post-diluvial spaceport was tantamount to control of the links between Earth and Nibiru. In the rekindled rivalry between the clans of Enlil and Enki, a neutral authority over the new spaceport was necessary. Sitchin explains that the solution was ingenious. Of equal lineage with them was their sister Sud. As a daughter of Anu, she bore the title Ninmah, meaning Great Lady. She was one of the original group of great Anunnaki who were pioneers on Earth, a member of the Pantheon of 12. She bore a son to Enlil, a daughter to Enki, and was lovingly called Mami, Mother of the Gods. She helped create man. With her medical skills, she saved many a life and was also known as Ninti, Lady of Life. But she never had her own dominions. It was decided that her new dominion would be Tilmoon, or what we now call the Sinai Peninsula. Making a home for his mother in the Sinai's southern region of high granite peaks, Ninurta bestowed on her a new title, Ninharzag, meaning Lady of the Head Mountain. It was the title by which Sud was to be called ever since. The term Head Mountain indicates that it was the highest peak in the area. This is the mountain nowadays known as Mount St. Catherine, a peak revered from antiquity. Rising nearby is the slightly lower peak called Mount Moses. They played a pivotal role in the planning of the post-diluvial spaceport and the landing corridor leading to it. The new spaceport plans adopted the old principles but had one major difference. This time the Anunnaki had at their disposal the ready-made platform in the Cedar Mountain at Baalbek, and they incorporated it into the new landing grid. As before the deluge, the Twin Peak Mount Ararat was to serve again as the northern landmark, anchoring the landing corridor and the landing path in the center of the corridor. The southern line of the landing corridor was a line connecting the twin-peaked Ararat with the highest peak in the Sinai Peninsula, Mount St. Catherine, and its twin, the slightly lower Mount Moses. The northern line of the landing corridor was a line extending from Ararat through the landing platform of Baalbek and continuing into Egypt. There, the terrain was too flat to offer natural landmarks. Thus, the Anunnaki proceeded to build the artificial twin peaks of the two great pyramids of Giza. But where was this anchor consisting of two artificial twin peaks to be erected? Here came into play an east-west imaginary line arbitrarily conceived by the Anunnaki in their space sciences. They arbitrarily divided the skies enveloping Earth into three bands or ways. The northern one was the way of Enlil, the southern one was the way of Enki, and the central one was the way of Anu. Separating them were the lines known to us as the 30th parallel north and the 30th parallel south. The 30th parallel north appears to have been of particular sacred significance. Holy cities from antiquity on, from Egypt to Tibet, have been located on it. It was chosen to be the land on which, at the intersection of the Ararat-Baalbek line, the Great Pyramids were to be built, and the line which would indicate in the Sinai's central plain the site of the spaceport. A line in the precise middle of the landing corridor, the landing path, was to lead to the exact location of the spaceport on the 30th parallel. This is how the landing grid was laid out, how the site of the spaceport was marked off, and how the Great Pyramids of Giza had come into being. This makes a strong case that the Great Pyramids of Giza were built not by pharaohs, but by the Anunnaki millennia earlier. It was held and believed in antiquity that the Giza pyramids and the Sphinx that accompanies them showed the way to the stairway to heaven, the spaceport in the Sinai Peninsula. The three pyramids of Giza, unique in their external and internal construction, size, and incredible durability, are also distinguished in that there is no inscription or decoration whatsoever inside them. They are just stark, functional structures rising from the plain as twin beacons to play a role not in the service of men, but of those who from heaven to earth came. Sitchin concludes that the three pyramids of Giza were built by first erecting the smaller third pyramid as a scale model. Then, in keeping with the preference for twin peak focal points, the two large pyramids were erected. Like the original Ekkur in Nippur, the Great Pyramid of Giza was built with mysterious dark chambers and was equipped with instruments for guiding the shuttlecraft to the post-diluvial spaceport in the Sinai. And to assure its neutrality, the pyramid was put under the patronage of Ninhursag. If Ninhursag was the neutral mistress of the Pyramid of Giza, it follows that she should have been known and revered as a goddess also in Egypt. This indeed is the case, except to the Egyptians she was known as Hathor. The goddess's name literally meant goddess whose home is where the falcons are, where the astronauts make their home, the spaceport. As mentioned, this spaceport was located in the post-diluvial era in the Sinai Peninsula. Accordingly, the title Hathor, home of the falcons, would require that the goddess bearing it should be mistress of the Sinai Peninsula. That indeed she was. The Egyptians considered the Sinai Peninsula to have been the domain of Hathor. All the temples and stelae erected by Egyptian pharaohs in the peninsula were dedicated exclusively to this goddess. And like Ninhursag in her later years, Hathor too was nicknamed the Cow and was depicted with cow's horns. Despite the rivalry and suspicions between the two divine dynasties, there is little doubt that the actual work of constructing the spaceport and the control and guidance facilities fell into the hands of Enki and his descendants. Ninurta proved himself capable of damming and irrigation works. Utu/Shamash knew how to command and operate the landing and takeoff facilities. But only Enki, the master engineer and scientist who had been through all this before, had the required know-how and experience for planning the massive construction works and supervising their execution. According to Manetho, Ptah turned over the dominion over Egypt after a reign of 9,000 years, but the reign of Ra was cut short after 1,000 years by the deluge. Then there followed a reign of 700 years by Shu, who helped Ra control the skies over earth, and the 500-year reign of Geb. It was at that time, circa 10,000 BCE, that the space facilities, the spaceport in the Sinai, and the Giza pyramids were built. In addition to the spaceport and the guidance facilities, there was also a need after the deluge for a new mission control center to replace the one that had existed before in Nippur. The need to equidistance this center from the outer space-related facilities dictated its locating on Mount Moriah, the Mount of Directing, the site of the future city of Jerusalem. That site, by both Mesopotamian and biblical accounts, was located in the lands of Shem, a dominion of the Enlilites. Yet, it ended up under an illegal occupation by the line of Enki. It was a development in which the Enlilites could not acquiesce, and so soon thereafter they deliberately launched a war to gain control of the space-related peaks, Mount Moriah, Mount St. Catherine in the Sinai, and the Great Pyramid in Egypt. It is clear from the text that the Enlilite forces were led and commanded by Ninurta, Enlil's foremost warrior. After many vicious and ferocious battles, the Enlilites emerged victorious. Enlil agreed to a cessation of the violence on condition that the territorial disputes be ended and the lands rightfully belonging to the Enlilites be vacated by Enki's clan. Enki agreed to cede the Sinai Peninsula with its spaceport and the site of the Mission Control Center in future Jerusalem, but Enki had his own firm condition. In return for granting Enlil and his offspring eternal rights to those lands and vital sites, the sovereignty of Enki and his descendants over the Giza complex had to be recognized for all time. Enlil did acquiesce to this condition, and Enki announced his decision. The Lord of Giza and Lower Egypt, he said, would be a young son of his, Ningishzida, meaning Lord of the artifact of life. As a result of the Second Pyramid War, there was a need to make a change in the original corridor plans because the Great Pyramid was stripped of its crystals and equipment and was rendered useless by Ninurta. The solution was to erect, still precisely on the northwestern corridor line but north of Giza, a new beacon city. The Egyptians called it the city of Anu. The Greeks, many millennia later, called the place Heliopolis. The shifting of the beacon site at the northwestern anchor of the landing corridor from Giza to Heliopolis also required a shift in the southeastern anchor to keep the two anchors equidistant from Mount Moriah. A mount only slightly lower than Mount St. Catherine, but still precisely on the corridor line, was found and adapted to the task. After the accord between Enlil and Enki, an era of peace existed for several millennia until about 3450 BCE. Marduk's seizure of Babylon and his attempt to build his own space facility is well known as the Tower of Babel incident. The ultimate result of Marduk's actions caused him to return to Egypt and usurp control from Ningishzida, known as Thoth by that time to the Egyptians. During the process, he accidentally caused the death of his brother Dumuzi, which led to his exile. Eventually, Marduk was pardoned and returned to create more conflict. But to make a long story short, too late, right? Around 2024 BCE, Marduk and his son Nabu attempt to regain control of Babylon and then the Sinai Peninsula. Leading his followers, Marduk marched on Sumer and enthroned himself in Babylon. Enlil demanded punishment for Marduk and Nebu. As Nebu marshaled his Canaanite followers to capture the spaceport, the Anunnaki approved the use of nuclear weapons, destroying the spaceport and the errant Canaanite cities. This was effectively the end of the spaceports in this region and marked the beginning of the end of Anunnaki rule. The deluge that swept over the earth flooded the mines in Africa, but exposed a motherlode of gold in the Andes Mountains of South America, enabling the Anunnaki to obtain more gold more easily and quickly and without the need for smelting and refining. It also made it possible to reduce the number of Anunnaki needed on Earth. On their state visit to Earth circa 4000 BCE, Anu and Antu visited the post-diluvial gold land on the shores of Lake Titicaca. The visit served as an opportunity to begin reducing the number of Nibiruans on Earth. It also approved peace arrangements between the rival half-brothers and their warring clans. But while Enki and Enlil accepted the territorial divisions, Enki's son Marduk never gave up the strife for supremacy that included control of the olden space-related facilities. It was then that the Enlilites began to prepare alternative spaceport facilities in South America. When the post-diluvial spaceport in the Sinai was wiped out with nuclear weapons in 2024 BCE, the facilities in South America were the only ones left entirely in Enlilite hands. And so, when the frustrated and disgusted Anunnaki leadership decided that it was time to leave, some could use the landing place. Others, perhaps with a last large haul of gold, had to use the South American facilities near the place where Anu and Antu stayed during their visit to the area. The place, now called Pumapumku, is a short distance from a shrunken Lake Titicaca, but was then situated on the lake's southern shore with harbor facilities. The archaeological finds in the place included many unusual stone blocks that were precisely cut, grooved, angled, and shaped. One does not need an engineering degree to realize that these stones were cut, drilled, and shaped by someone with incredible technological ability and sophisticated equipment. Indeed, one would doubt whether stones could be so shaped nowadays. The puzzle is compounded by the mystery of what purpose did these technological miracles serve. Obviously for some unknown yet highly sophisticated purpose. If it was to serve as casting dies for complex instruments, what and whose instruments were they? Clearly, one can think only of the Anunnaki as possessing both the technology to make those dies and to use them on their end products. The main outpost of the Anunnaki was situated a few miles inland at a site known as Tiwanaku, now belonging to Bolivia. Archaeological, geological, and mineralogical research at the site and in the area confirmed that Tiwanaku also served as a metallurgical center. Based on various finds and their similarity to depictions in ancient Hittite sites in Turkey, the gold and tin obtainment operations there were supervised by Ishkur, or Adad, Enlil's youngest son. Between the Ingenio and Nazca rivers, explorers have found one of the most puzzling riddles of antiquity, the so-called Nazca Lines. Called by some the world's largest artworks, a vast area that extends eastward from the flat desert to the rugged mountains was used by someone as a canvas to draw on it scores of images. The drawings are so huge that they make no sense at the ground level, but, when viewed from the air, clearly represent known and imaginary animals and birds. The drawings were made by removing the topsoil to a depth of several inches and were executed with a unicursal line, a continuous line that curves and twists without crossing over itself. Anyone flying over the area invariably concludes that someone airborne has used a soil blasting device to doodle on the ground below. Directly relevant to the subject of the Anunnaki departure, however, is another even more puzzling feature of the Nazca Lines. Actual lines that look like wide runways. Straight without fault, these flat stretches, sometimes narrow, sometimes wide, sometimes short, sometimes long, run straight over hills and vales, no matter the shape of the terrain. There are some 740 straight lines, sometimes combined with triangular trapezoids. They frequently crisscross each other without rhyme or reason, sometimes running over the animal drawings, revealing that the lines were made at different times. For those who rule out an ancient astronaut's solution, the enigma remains unsolved. Though the wider lines look like airport runways on which wheeled aircraft roll to take off or land, this is not the case here, if only because the lines are not horizontally level. They run straight over uneven terrain, ignoring hills, ravines, and gullies. Indeed, rather than being there to enable takeoff, they appear to be the result of takeoffs by the Anunnaki craft that left lines on the ground below created by their engine's exhaust. That the celestial chambers of the Anunnaki did emit such exhaust is indicated by the Sumerian pictograph for the space gods. According to Sitchin, this is the solution of the puzzle of the Nazca Lines. Nazca was the last spaceport of the Anunnaki. It served them after the one in the Sinai was destroyed, and then it served them for the final departure between 610 BCE and 560 BCE. Finally, Teotihuacan and many other pyramidal sites in Central and South America have been suggested as purported landing and launch facilities. Insulating materials such as mica have been discovered in various pyramidal locations. What was the use to which this insulating material was put at Teotihuacan? Sitchin posits that, at least in Teotihuacan, the series of structures, subterranean chambers, tunnels, the diverted river, the semi-subterranean sections with their sluices, and the underground compartments lined with mica were all components of a scientifically conceived plant for the separation, refining, or purification of mineral substances. As we can see, Iraqi Transport Minister Kazim Finjan was pretty far off base when he referenced Sitchin back in 2016. The first spaceport in that region was actually in use about 440,000 years before his projected date. But at least he got the general region of the Dakar governorate correct. Joking aside, his public statement is a perfect example of how dangerous it is to the credible pursuit of the ancient astronaut hypothesis when someone possesses at best a cursory knowledge of Sitchin's research, but then proceeds to speak as he or she is an authority on the subject matter. It allows the critics, skeptics, and debunkers to run amok. The purpose of this video was to provide a larger context of Sitchin's research on the subject matter and potentially enlighten viewers that seek a deeper understanding about our ancient past.